In this episode, we talk to Jessie Schilling and Colin McCorery about enhancing risk maturity in your operating environment. Let's get into Jessie first. Jessie combines creative and infrastructure intelligence. Jessie is a management consultant with HKA's advisory team, and at the core of her work are processes and people where she seeks to implement agile strategies and solutions within complex project environments. Jessie is positioned in the integrated project services team, which specializes in risk management, change management, and portfolio alignment and performance, with a focus on process improvement.
Colin is a risk management professional with 25 years experience across many industry sectors and countries. He is the current and founding chair of the Institute of Risk Management Regional Group Australia and the trainer for the Institute of Risk Management training course in Australia. Outside of work, Colin likes to keep fit by boxing and doing cardio fitness. He's a family man and he's married with 3 children. Now, Val, we certainly went all over the show. It's not the first time we've spoken about risk and maturity, but it was interesting the angles that Colin and specifically Jessie brought to this episode.
Yeah, it was great to get some insights on project and risk and how important risk is, particularly around risk culture. And we were able to even sneak in there something about risk and AI, which I thought was always fun. What about you, Dale? How'd you go?
Yeah, you love your AI, which is fantastic. I love the fact that you talk about AI and technology and the future, and yet your internet stops working again, which is great. But no, we had lots of interesting discussions with Jessie and Colin, and I think their views certainly will get the juices flowing, particularly on how those that find themselves in organizations or projects are looking for certain hints and tips to improve the risk culture, as you say, the maturity, the attitude towards risk. And there's some hints and tips that they give away. So look out for this one, folks. There's a lot to get your teeth into, but we'll leave it there. As we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
We understand construction. I think how we can help is identifying that risk up front and enabling the transparency that our tools bring to the table.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us. And it's great to feel like we are a global podcast again with people dotted all over the country and the world. And it's great to see you, Dale, taking some breaks out and a vacation. Where are you at the moment?
I'm in the Algarve, Val, trying to catch last little bit of sunshine before we head into this UK winter. But the bigger question is, where's Martin Curriston? Because he always gives you flack when you're not on. He always gives me flack when I'm not on. Have you seen him?
No, well, he did message me and said he's on a train to London. Slacker. So we will give him shit later, I'm sure. But yeah, it was actually our last podcast, or the last podcast we were together. We were together in real time in Saudi, which was fantastic. So I look forward to doing that in December, mate. You should come down for a little tickle in Saudi, and we can do another podcast. But let's introduce our guests. First off, Colin, how are you, sir?
Well, thank you for having me on today.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I love having 2 guests because then we get twice the value. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And Jessie, how are you?
I did lose you for a moment, but I am here. Hello.
The only pullback is this internet connection sometimes does drop out, but don't worry, we will fix that. It's good to meet you guys. And so usually we get into this to just make it nice and easy, is a little bit about where you're from. And
the best thing is when Val's in Melbourne and it's raining and then the internet just drops out. We had that in, I think, 3 episodes ago. And it was fascinating listening to him talk over people while he didn't hear we were all talking. So it was great. But if we pick up from there while his internet rejoins, I guess if we start off, Colin, Jessie, you know, those that aren't familiar with you, the 2 of you, I don't know if you don't mind giving us a bit of a backdrop of, I guess, you know, how you started off, how you landed yourself in the project management space to the present day. And I guess as we, you know, say ladies first, so Jessie, if you don't mind going.
Absolutely. I think like any project professional, or more specifically a project controls professional, there's no linear journey. So for me, I first had an exposure to infrastructure through Arup, and they had this vision of building a better world, and that really appealed to me. And so I found myself working for HKA, which works through end-to-end project lifecycle, and found myself looking at some of the project controls disciplines, change control and risk management, of course, which we're talking about today. And I now sit in a portfolio PMO role. So that covers portfolio alignment and performance, but also the robustness and maturity of our delivery methodology, particularly when it comes to project controls. So I really have a passion for linking those more conceptual to more tangible outcomes on our projects. And it's the place to be. Having this opportunity to inject some of the creative intelligence that I have to offer with the infrastructure intelligence that's required in the future. Amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. And those that do listen to the podcast, your name's actually no stranger to this podcast, because I think Simon White, probably about 2 years ago, name dropped you. He went to a conference you were talking at, and he said he loved your presentation. And I think you ended off with something like this, there's probably only more questions and no answers, or something like that. So maybe we'll get into a bit of that as well. But Colin, let's bring you in. If you don't mind, I guess, sharing your backstory as well, your origin story, and where you are today.
Okay, so my journey in the risk and the project management space started many years ago, like the start of a Star Wars film. I was actually working as a contractor consultant for the Ministry of Defence over in the UK, and I had a tap on the shoulder one day, and it was a colonel, and he says, "Our risk manager just quit. We want to send you on a course, and then you can become our risk manager." So that's how my risk management life began. I went on a risk management course with in the military, and I weren't in the military. I was a civil person, not in the military. I was a civil person, and I became their risk manager, and it was mainly for defence estates at the time. And basically, they looked after all the military establishments, all the capex works, all the opex works, and keeping the military moving and going, somewhere for their squaddies to have a roof over their head type thing. So that's where I got into risk management there. From there, I went across and I was working in the nuclear sector with the atomic weapons establishment, so still very much in the kind of like the military defence type space. And then after that, I jumped into transportation with London Underground, Network Rail in the UK. And then at that point, I had a company phone me up and say, "There's a big project going on in Australia, in Darwin, and we want you to come and help us do the risk management on that." So across to Perth I came. I was in Perth for a little while and going between Perth and Yokohama until I was mobilised up onto site in Darwin on the Ichthys project, which is a big $36 billion LNG plant that we built up there. Probably learnt my most about risk management there because I was working on the contractor side as opposed to the client side for once. So I got to see how things were done differently. And since then, after that finished, I've worked in government, I've worked, you name it, I've done it type thing. So I've worked in very many sectors: power, water, transportation infrastructure, the metros, all that type of stuff. And to a point where I've started my own risk management consultancy now called Victorum. We do risk management and CISA. And I've also become the founding chair of the Institute of Risk Management for the Regional Group Australia, of which my good colleague there, Jessie, is also on the committee. So that's a bit of a life story there for you.
No, that's brilliant, Colin. And you got a lot of varied experience there as well. Myself and Val have also worked across various industries. But I think the thing that you got common with Val is you're both sort of from the military background. And one thing that Val's been battling with right now is his internet. So let's see if he's back on. You there, Val?
Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me okay now. That's the life of Melbourne. There you go. You always get something special down here. Every time we press record, there's something happening here. Either I screw up the prompt, Colin, or The internet decides to drop me out when I'm talking. But look, I love the idea that that defense is your background, because I think one thing that defense do get right is rigidity and repeating the same practice over and over. And we can learn a lot in I guess, the public markets and sectors around how they actually build and develop projects. One of the challenges we do have.
And we've lost him again.
Can
That's
you guys
great.
hear me?
He just said over and over, and there he goes.
I'll pause again.
You'll pause again. No, keep
I
going.
back?
You're back. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, good. One of the things we can learn from the defense industry is exactly that how they apply mature projects and approaches and guidelines and processes. But we don't see it a lot. Do you, with your background in defense, what's the comparison or the contrast between how defense run projects and how everyone else does?
Yes, it's probably somewhat different to the way that military operations run and stuff like that. So it was very much project management as we do it at a Sydney Metro or something like that. It was very much the similar type of. So I don't believe it was any. It was still quite immature, to be honest with you. I know I'm going back like 20, 25 years ago. So, but the practices in the risk space was still quite immature. But again, that was on a different side of the military rather than you guys who was in the uniform. And you've got to be repeatable, and you've got to make sure that those processes are rigid, because lives depend on it in some instances, don't they? So it was very much different. But I did enjoy it. It was probably, if I was to say what was the best job I've ever had, that would have been it. I just enjoyed the whole environment. And working in, as part of a kind of a mixed military and civil team. And, every lunchtime you could go out for a run without getting told off how long you're going to be and all this, because that was the environment you operated in. And it was great. I loved it. But it worked to be for, just my career just moved on, and it was time to move on. And but I did learn a lot.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think as well, we usually, when we bring in terminology, we always try and get a definition, because it's not necessarily because it's a hard word. It's because that word is used a lot, and risk is one of those words, and so is maturity. So I might just, to get a baseline, Jessie, maybe start with you, and then Colin, maybe if you can also provide your definition. What is risk maturity, just for the listeners? Jessie?
The art side, how we approach risk, therefore, means, do we need to hypothesize if we take the science route, or if we take it through the art route, do we need to think more conceptually about the interconnectedness of the risk landscape? So when we think of risk maturity, there's different lenses we need to have on maturity. Is it the maturity of the process, the maturity of the people, the data, or the systems? And we need a holistic view on what maturity looks like for risk management. In its essence, it's about pursuing that best practice and excellence and having continuous improvement in the risk management space. It's a measurement of ourselves, but specifically how we measure ourselves against best practice, and continuously build maturity across projects, organisations, and industry at large, so that we can be fit for future as professionals.
Brilliant. And Colin?
Oh, yeah, so Jessie's nailed it on the head there. But for me, in addition to that, I would say risk maturity is a way that we can understand how effective our risk management practices are, and processes, and like Jessie's mentioned, people, everything. So it's all encompassing anything an organisation needs in terms of managing their risks effectively, and understanding where they are on a scale. And we'll take you through risk maturity models and how we can assess where we are on that scale shortly. But yeah, it's just a way of measuring the effect of your risk management.
I think the effectiveness is a really key word there, because in order to be effective, it's not just about being more advanced and optimized, it's also about having the basics right and having the fundamentals in place so that you can level up. Another element to it is, in order to be effective in risk management doesn't happen in isolation or in silos on a project. So you can't be effective in risk management if you're not also effective at holistic controls, your schedule management, your cost control, your change control, etc., etc. So effectiveness truly is a broader word in this context.
Yeah, those interconnectivities need to be there. As one don't work without the other. It's waste time being good at something, and the next thing you need to do in the process just falls down. So it's a whole organisational thing. But in terms of the risk management, having that level of maturity is certainly going to stand you in good stead in achieving your objectives. And if we reference that back to a project, is achieving your projects on time, in cost, all that type of stuff. So
Yeah, we've certainly heard it over the years that, risk is important and we need risk on projects, and it is holistically part. And I believe I 100% agree with what you're saying. It goes along with planning, it goes along with project controls, good finance structures, everything like that. How come then? And this is a bit of a prodding question, because we're all three of us are in Australia. We've seen a lot in the news about project blowouts. This is no surprise, particularly on infrastructure and transport projects, with massive amounts of funding going into those areas across the East Coast, where risk comes up as kind of almost like a lesson learned. Yet there was plenty of risk people on the projects. There was plenty of risk frameworks. There's no lack of risk process and methodology out there. What are we doing wrong, Colin? I might start with you.
yeah, look, so I'll be blunt when I'm responding to this because I'm a bit passionate about it. Okay, so we've got good people, we've got good processes, we've got the frameworks, we've got everything. Unfortunately, I think there's a too much bias in the process. So, the risk people, they're doing their thing, and they're doing it well. However, they can take it to a point, and then generally they're stopped at a point. I'm going to give you an example. Okay, so risk management, everyone knows about contingency and how much you need to deliver a project and everything. The process should dictate how that contingency is derived. Okay, so you step through the process, you understand what your threats, what your opportunities, what your uncertainties, and you apply the amounts of money or the amounts of time around your base to achieve that contingency. Yeah, whether it's a P50, P90, whatever it is. Okay, there's been many occasions which I've witnessed, and unfortunately, more often than I'd like to remember, where you do that, you go through a process, you've worked hard, you've gone and you've got everything out, and then someone at the top, I know a delivery director will say, make it 10 million or make it 20 million. There's a biased opinion, so the process then don't dictate what that contingency is. The bloke who's running the project tells you what it is, and that is the bias that I'm talking about. Now, that's one part of why I believe there's cost overruns, because taking a business case with the proper contingency that is required to deliver a mega project, you will never get the sign off because there's just not enough money. Yeah, so people take it forward at the level that they can get the sign off. Yeah, and then worry about the rest of it later on. The other thing is, I've spoke to many people about cost blowouts, and I'm going to call Inland Rail out because it's public and everyone knows it's cost blowout, and risk was one of the things that was the reason for it. A lot of people I've spoken to says it was always going to be that cost. That was always going to be the cost, or that's always should have been the cost to deliver this project. It's just that bias again. We can't go forward and tell everyone it was that cost because we'll never get it off the ground. So we'll tell them this cost, and then we'll add a bit, then we'll add a bit, and add a bit. And that's my honest opinion, and through speaking with people in the industry and experts of why there's a lot of cost blowouts. A, because there's bias in the process, and B, because maybe that was the cost of the project anyway, but we didn't want to tell everyone that because we'd never got it off the ground. So that's my honest opinion, and that's backed on speaking with experts in the industry. So
Yeah, I'd love to get your take as well on that, Jesse.
It's very nuanced. I think what Colin has just touched on is there is that, I guess, top down and bottom up element to risk management where, for our project environments, we want to ensure we're making the right decisions and decision making, the leadership making decisions that aren't risk informed. That might be influenced by the bottom up or it might be top down. So if our risk information isn't being filtered up to the decision makers, or conversely, if the decision makers aren't willing to admit and face those risks, then there's a lack of transparency and ability to share that risk position, and then a lack of ability to be mature holistically. Another thing that I see on projects is that sometimes the risk profession and the risk manager isn't the voice of risk. Other project stakeholders can become the voice of risk. And so we have to be careful with how we interact, I think, with other project stakeholders in this space. In this day and age, systems thinking is a huge element in complexity to our projects. And if we don't understand those interdependencies between different functions, and particularly when it comes to risk, complexity is a huge source of interface risks, as an example. And if we don't understand the complexity, we're not able to navigate that uncertainty and the complexity. So it's an interesting space to be in this day and age, but it means that when we're getting a risk and we're doing the analysis, it's way more holistic than just a quantitative, say, like Colin said, like a quantitative number or contingency percentage that you can apply and fix. It becomes way more qualitative and interconnected to a lot of other elements of the project space.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, both of you. I mean, we're all project people, and I'm sure many listeners will resonate with what you're saying, particularly you, Colin and Jessie, because risk, the torch of risk as well, I feel like sometimes the perception is it's a nice to have. And that's because it's not necessarily always embedded in the project. It's usually part of what you call the PMO, or part of a kind of a professional service that sits on top of the organization or next to the organization or kind of next to the projects teams, which is unfortunate because obviously risk and the various other professional services like planning and cost control are all elements that help you to basically decide where you are and where you're going. And it's an unnecessary but necessary skill to have someone in that space that can champion and carry the torch for risk. And it's funny because I think a lot of project managers definitely do want that skill set. I don't think they're not wanting it. So there's this interesting dialogue between kind of what works on the ground, giving them value for money, and then at the top of an organization, how leadership maybe skews that bias you said, Colin, in terms of how they adopt or adapt to risk. And as you said, maybe it's just a way to funnel money at a later stage and not necessarily scare people with a big cost. But I think there's some truth in that too. I'm going to bring Dale into the conversation because he's been very, very quiet. Dale, over to you.
I haven't been that quiet, Val. Whenever your internet breaks up, I jump in for you. But it's been fascinating listening to both you, Colin and Jessie, talk, because I was at a round table with the Infrastructure and Projects Authority the other day in the UK, and we were talking about, various elements of how to measure all things. And it was interesting because we spoke about sort of politics making decisions on budgets and sort of burying their heads in the sand. And I think both of you alluded to that. And someone brought up the fact, I think it's in Ben Flivberg's book, that he writes about strategic misrepresentation, which is basically lying, right? So there is an argument to say that if you don't strategically misrepresent the full picture of your project and what it's going to cost, that you'll never get it signed off. But then on the other hand is how do you manage and mitigate that potential true cost? So that's an interesting aspect as well as my first observation. The other thing that I think you were alluding to, Jessie, was that, and if John Holman was on this episode, he's been on before, he would actually agree with you where you talk about, risk being systemic, actually, and depending on the type of project, whether it's, I guess, a bit of from Dave Snowden, whether it's a simple, chaotic, or complex project, you'll have to apply different methodologies, and that's probably a good segue to go into those. But I guess my first question, Jessie, is risk management processes and methodologies, are they vanilla? Can they be vanilla? Or do we have to have them horses for courses?
It's a really good question, because I think when we think about ISO 31000 as an example, your textbook risk management, typically if you follow the process right, you could, get away with ticking boxes. But I do think the real richness and beauty in risk management actually comes from, customizing your approach to the project space that you're in. Like you've just said, we do operate on quite complex and large scale projects in this day and age. And that means that we have new requirements often. We have, so sustainability requirements or regulatory requirements, which go beyond your usual PESTLE analysis. There needs to be crisis plans for black swan events like we've seen in the last couple of years. And a robust and mature culture will enable those things to not be surprises anymore. There'll always be an element of surprise, but I think when we have that nuanced understanding of how complex our projects are, we do live in a VUCA world, so volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And what that means is that our mitigations and our solutions actually also need to be complex and adaptive. If you think of when a project, as we've just said, say is announced, what happens in that timeline, whether it be 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, means that in their essence, a project is an intervention into a problem space. It's addressing a real problem. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a need for it. So how is that real problem and how's that problem space evolving as the project evolves? We need to adapt and evolve our risk management practices and our project practices at large to match and mirror the actual intervention we're trying to have in that problem space. So it becomes a much broader solution that we try to offer. And that really brings us to why we need to be effective in the type of risk management we do and truly robust and optimized in looking at, lessons learned from past projects as an example, or leveraging if there's consistencies and similarities between some of these risks in our projects. Why aren't we applying standardized treatment plans, say contamination as a perfect example, on our construction projects? How is there not a cookie cutter solution and mitigation that we're applying? Why do we reinventing the wheel every single time we encounter contamination on our projects? I'm obviously very passionate about this as well.
No, it's great points that you bring up there. And Colin, if I switch to you as well, and we kind of bring in some of the various, I guess, tools in the toolbox, call them methodologies. Are there sort of simple ones you can apply to more simple projects versus the more complex ones? I mean, with complexity, we're looking at the likes of, AI and ML coming in these days. Big data, systemic risks require lots of various nodes and links to determine what the drivers are, the root causes, etc., and what the mitigations potentially are. Can we get into predictive analytics when it comes to risk and things like that? How big is the array of methodologies that are at the disposal of most project managers and risk professionals?
There's a lot there. So there's a lot of different methodologies we can apply. However, they all fit around the risk management process. So in the 25 years that I've been doing risk management across all those different industry sectors, I've used the same risk management process all the time. And what we need to do is continue to do the 31,000 risk management process, but then we can support it with the innovative tools and techniques that are coming out now, the AIs, and we did have a good the Institute of Risk Management Regional Group. We did have a guy who talked about AI and how that's being applied in risk management, which was really interesting. Things are moving forward in the risk management space using those type of technologies and innovations. But there are a ream of tools, technology, techniques that we can apply depending on the size, scale and complexity of a project. But it all fits around, at the heart of it is that risk management process. And as long as we stick with that as a core, we can apply all those different things around it, and we should be good to go. I believe one of the things that's impacting it most, Dale, is the time. And back in the day, again, I'm a bit of an older than you lot. we had time to deliver these projects, so we would work out what the time is to deliver a project. Now we've got to get this project delivered before the next election, so everything's compressed, and that impacts what we can do in that risk space as well as every other part of a project. So over to you. That's my take on it.
No, that's great. And sticking with processes, because you hammered down quite firmly there. It's, process, process, process. And
Mm.
I just wonder because, as you know, in different project environments, different organizations, you do get different, I guess, capabilities, skill sets, experiences, etc.
Mm.
And so, be should our processes be built around the knowledge, skills, and behaviors that are available to that specific project or organization? Or should we develop processes and the knowledge, skills, and behaviors should formulate around the process? Which comes first, chicken or egg?
Yeah, so look, for me, the process is the process, and everyone should then, fit around that process, and that should be at the heart of everything. And this is where this whole risk maturity discussion comes in. Different levels, different organisations will have. There's going to be different levels of risk maturity, and from the naive through to the novice and the normal and the natural. So that's just a simple way of describing it. So when you've got an organisation that's not got the capability, they've not got the training, they don't really understand anything, they haven't got the procedures in place. We're talking that they're top and naive in what they do, whereas someone who does, they've got the risk culture there, they've got the people, it's embedded. The risk management is embedded in everything they do. They don't even have to think about it. It's just a natural thing. Yeah, they just do it because that's the way they do things. That's the other end of the scale. So from one corner to the other on a matrix, basically. And I believe that the processes still need to be at the heart of it, and all that needs to fit around it. And then we need to then develop the people, develop those procedures, and all the tools and techniques to enhance that process. That's my feeling, and that's where I generally work. To be honest with you,
No, that's great, and it's good that you put your point of view across because you clearly have a lot of experience in this space. And
Mm.
if I bring you back in, Jesse, just talking about, I guess, capability and training and maturity of organizations. I mean, Colin mentioned there are a few different levels of risk maturity in organizations. Do you perhaps mind, just for the listeners, decomposing what each of those levels look like in organizations? And then perhaps from there, what they may be able to do to go from the level they're at to the next level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is truly Pandora's box when we start to get to that. So, yeah, heart is process is at the heart, like Colin has just said, but how we adopt that process and implement the process is really where we start to look at more of the problem space here. I think there's different maturity models out there, and it might be depending on the size of your project or the scale of the industry that you're in, what model you adopt. So there's the 3 lines model, of course, line 1, line 2, line 3, and arguably you need maturity at all 3 levels in order to be holistically mature. And this also introduces that complexity of assuring versus maturing in tandem, the assurance function and the risk management function. Of course, there's a P3M3 5-level maturity framework. I think this is what I've seen most commonly. So you're level 1 through to level 5, you're having more repeatable processes, practices to manage, to optimize. And that one's quite a simplistic and easy one to understand where you're at, because often you'll see, okay, well, do we have our practices documented as the first step? Do we have a risk management framework? Do we have common language and consistent way we're identifying the cause and the effect and framing our credible scenarios as an example? And once you at least have that repeatable process, you can start to level up there where you get to your ideal state, which is when you're starting to optimize and you're starting to introduce AI. We have amazing AI capabilities now where we can actually get them to generate the scenarios and the solutions, and this will be the future. I don't want to scare any of our risk professionals, but Monte Carlo simulation isn't an optimization tool. So the future will be AI, which actually has that capability to optimize and not just predict and offer simulations. Those are a few examples of maturity models, but there's also the IRM has a maturity model. So they look at the 4 N's. So I think it's naive, novice, normal, and natural. There's other ones I've seen emerging, evolving. There's so many different ones which have beautiful buzzword languages, but essentially they're all trying to capture the same essence of different levels of maturity and capability in our organizations. And I think the first step there, I said it earlier in this podcast, was if you don't have the foundations right, you're not able to level up from there. Simple things like, are you conducting risk workshops regularly? But for me, it comes deeper than that. You might be ticking all the boxes and doing the risk reports and doing the risk workshops, but how are you engaging the stakeholders on the project? Are they actually contributing and engaged? So the other week we had an amazing 3-hour, don't recommend, risk workshop, which was a hybrid environment, which was very difficult. You had Miro boards with whiteboarding. You had 40 people in the room doing the old school post-it notes on your matrices, and you had to make it interactive. Otherwise you'd lose all of those project professionals and senior leaders in the room over a 3-hour period. So we had to bring risk to the forefront of culture and make it exciting and make it really an opportunity. It's not just a threat, it's a real opportunity. We wanted to think about how can we capitalize and exploit some of the cost saving opportunities that we have on our projects, as an example. I'll pass to Colin if he has anything to add on the types of maturity models we see in the industry.
Yeah, so just following on from Jessie, and making risk management exciting is a hard job. So good work, Jessie. But yeah, look, there's a ream of risk maturity models. Everyone seems to have one these days. But essentially, what you need to you use a risk maturity model to understand the effectiveness of your risk management practices within your organisation. Yeah, and really, what we do with risk maturity and the models that we use is kind of like you need to know where you are before you can decide where you're going. And I've done this quite a few times now. So as an example of how you assess your risk maturity, you've got your risk maturity model. You've got a big list of questions, and you basically sit down with all levels of the hierarchy through an organisation, from the top of the board all the way through to the graduate who's just walked through the door and it's a bit green. And you ask these questions and you get their inputs, and then that goes into the model, and presto, outcomes. You're a level 2 or you're level 3, depending if it's a 4 or a 5 or a 6 kind of level model. Okay, and then when you've spoke with the board, as well as asking them these interview questions, you're asking them, as an organisation, where do you want your maturity to be? And we shouldn't all assume that maturity needs to be at the highest level. The maturity needs to be where it needs to be for whatever your organisation is doing. What your ambitions are and what your goals and your objectives are. So you don't always have to have the top scale of maturity. It's got to be appropriate for your organisation. But yeah, so we understand where the board would want you to be, where you currently are, and then you got that, put that roadmap in place, and then you can step through what are the things that have came out that's low as part of that model, that assessment, and that you need to work on to help you get up to where you want to be, and what are the things you're doing good, and how can you enhance them even further. And that's basically how you do it. But I will say, I've done some of these, and one of the ones I did was over for the Northern Territory Government, specifically on the power and water side of things, and it just to get one step in that maturity matrix and that model was kind of like a two-year roadmap. It's not an overnight. You can't just go from A to Z quickly. It's like risk culture. It's not an overnight thing. Everyone talks about it. To actually get it embedded and be working effectively in your organisation, it takes years. And so I would say to all those organisations out there that do want to start enhancing their risk maturity, get started now, because it's not a 5-minute job.
Yeah, that's great, Colin. I was actually thinking when you said risk culture, that was exactly the question that I was going to talk about, was that bit like safety, health and safety and quality. I mean, it's everybody's responsibility on a project to make sure that they're involved in it. And changing culture is absolutely one of the hardest things to do, because that's hearts and minds stuff. And to borrow the cigarette marketing campaign philosophy, get them while they're young. How do we get young people involved? Because obviously these projects now, we're looking at 3 generations of of people, of workers in the same space, working in the same time with different ideas about how projects are run. You got the old school, you got the middle school, and you got the new school. How do we get the new school into risk and make it exciting, as Jesse's doing a great job, obviously, but how do we do that, Colin? And then I'll jump to Jesse.
Yeah. Okay, so you're right. So, I mean, looking at this screen now, I'm guessing I'm in the old school and Jesse's in the new generation, and you guys are somewhere in between, eh? But look, what we've done, we've formed the Institute of Risk Management regional group for Australia, and I'm the chair of that, and Jesse's one of the committee members, along with Nathan and Anne. Shout out to those guys. And one of the purposes of forming that group is obviously we want to bring the Institute of Risk Management members together and obviously to network. But the second part of that is, we want to help increase the risk maturity throughout this great nation of Australia. But we also want to start developing that next generation of risk professionals, because, you know, I'm not going to be around forever, and Jesse's going to move up that hierarchy. So we need to consistently bring in that next gen. And that's one of the ways that me, Jesse, and the team are actually actively working on bringing that next generation in, making sure that when they do come into the market, and, you know, with the innovation things that Jesse talked about in those workshops, making risk not a boring subject, making it a bit more fun, a bit more innovative, and that type of stuff, making sure that when they come into the market, the Institute of Risk Management and the Risk Management Institute of Australia, they're aware of those places, the training courses they can do, how they can develop their career and all that, and just basically giving them that mentoring and that encouragement. So that's something that we're actively doing right now. And Jesse, do you want to add anything further to that about what we're doing as part of
I
that
think
group?
what I'll add is, I guess on that, yeah, how do you make that intergenerational connection in the industry? I think this is a perfect case study because Colin and I worked together in my first couple of years in infrastructure industry. So worked side by side doing risk management. And so I was learning from him, and we were working across 6 of the greenfield city stations on a metro project. And that truly exposed me to risk management. Before that, I actually had no idea it was a profession. And it's an interesting concept because in schools these days, kids are being told that the jobs that they might be applying for in the future don't exist yet, and that the skills that they need might not be known yet. Then us in industry are being told that we may be made extinct by AI. But really what we're starting to see is that there's a lot of really niche professions out there. And if you don't have exposure or understanding of them, how are you meant to know that that could be a good fit for you? And so I was really, I guess, inspired by how Colin and how the project teams really rallied around risk management, and that's what brought me in. And I think that's how we'll bring in other generations, is too, by pure exposure. If someone's analytical, it's a perfect pathway, but also there's a lot of creativity and innovation opportunities in this. My concern, I will caveat, is I do think it is too easy in this day and age to become a risk manager. There are a lot of qualifications that are available out there, but if you don't have that depth of experience and ability to actually manage risks on projects, that's truly what will differentiate you as a risk manager. I have seen it, and Colin, we had a conversation about this. We have seen project resources being progressed very early on in their careers, purely maybe because of the skills shortage and resource constraints that we have across the market, but they don't have that depth and maturity, and that might be why we're seeing a lack of risk maturity across our projects in Australia.
Yeah, there's good points there, Jesse and Colin. I just wonder though, and this might be me being a little bit provocative on the Project Chatter podcast, have we done risk management on projects a disservice by giving it a function and a name and a role and a title as risk manager? Because often you get on some projects that are more immature, and it's not my job, it's the risk manager's job. So have we done it a disservice by sectioning it off, by siloing it? Colin, let's hear
Yeah,
from you first.
yeah, I'll go with that one. Yeah, you're probably right, because, you know, if we go back to Jesse mentioned the 3 lines, the 3 lines model there. The first line of defence is for everyone on the project who's actively working on a project, he should be actively thinking about risk, considering risk, and remember, risk is threat and opportunity, and managing risk. And then the risk manager is meant to come in as that second line, and then make sure that the first line is doing what they've obviously help, guide, and assist, but also make sure that they've thought about everything, they're being proactive. So by bringing in a risk manager, there is the culture that it's not my job, that's the risk manager's job to do it. And that is incorrect. And this is where the risk maturity and the understanding of risk needs to be better. It is the frontline people, the project managers, the project teams who should be actively managing their risk with the support of the risk manager. It ain't the risk manager's job to do the management of risk. It's to make sure, help, guide, and assist with the management of risk. So there may be some disservice there. Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because project controls or PMO, whatever you want to label it, right? We have all these different, I guess, functions, if you will, and sometimes I think we've distilled it too much and we forget that it's actually a small part of a whole, and we forget that actually, there's the moving parts have to move together in synchronization. And Jesse, if I bring you back in, I just wondered, do you have any real life examples where you've seen this type of culture and behavior and how potentially that project or organization has managed to change their risk culture around?
Yeah, of course. So I think this conversation is interesting because without someone facilitating and driving risk and being a champion for it, I think it often gets pushed in the corner, or it becomes more of that auditing function. What I've seen is that ownership and accountability in this space is really important. So as an example, if you have your risk register for one component of your project, so say a contract package, you'll often have your delivery director maybe who manages most of those risks, but the people that are actually responsible for implementing some of the treatments and the mitigations and the controls will be your project team members. And I think this is where we start to see more of the relationship to the projects is who's owning this, who's ultimately accountable if something goes wrong here or if it's realized, versus who actually has the power to intervene and to help be a part of the solution and treatment here. And that's where we start to see an improvement in the holistic culture is everyone realizes they have a part to play in mitigating risk on the project. Or exploiting it in the opportunities environment. I don't want to ever neglect the fact that it is the positive and the negative sides of the risk management. So I think risk ownership is probably the best example. That's something that came out of the workshop that we did the other week. The project director stood up and said, you know what, I don't want to walk away with any actions from this risk workshop, because while he wants the oversight of all of the risks, he wants his team members to be taking accountability for the mitigation strategies that they're putting in place and to run with them and to just report back. So hopefully that's a good example.
That's encouraging to hear that a project delivery director's saying that. So that's good.
I was just going to add there as well, Jesse, with regards to mitigations and treatments. I mean, what that director said was fantastic, that don't take actions, because one of the challenges with risk I see is the risks are raised. I think everyone does a good job at raising risks. They're like, hey, this could be an issue, or this could happen. Then from there, something happens between that and the treatment of the risk. Now, I'm not sure on the projects you've been on, but the projects I've been on, mitigations tend to become then a secondary habit of ignorance, and they just kind of like, oh, well, I've done the risk, tick for me. And then I see a lot of risk managers running around trying to get the real value, which is let's avoid this risk or whatever the treatment might be, or let's mitigate this risk and let's get a treatment plan in place or a mitigation plan in place and let's do that. How do you deal with the whole mitigation process? And is there a way for people out there listening to, get more accountability? Because that was another good point you raised around the treatment of risks rather than just raising risks. I'll go with you first, Jesse.
So I think it's interesting when we talk about risk mitigations and treatments, it really stems from having a good understanding of root causes. So That detailed understanding of causation then enables us to have credible scenarios and be treating both cause and effect. I think we need to be really careful in this space that we're not just treating or considering the consequence, but also trying to get to the systemic root cause of these risks and those underlying drivers. So having a robust understanding of the risk environment and the risk profile and a comprehensive analysis behind the risk really drives a mature mitigation plan. So as an example, say in a defence context, this is where we started with the project podcast, so it's a good place to come back to. In the defence landscape, there is quite a difference in the types of impacts and also the objectives that they have as, say, compared to a construction site. So in both of these industries, you need to have a mature understanding of the safety element when it comes to your risk profiles, but you might also then have a different appetite in how you tolerate those risks. So in a defence landscape, often there's stable risks that must be managed on an ongoing basis to ensure that there's a certain level of preparedness for certain risk events. And what you'll see is that there's often these enduring long-term risks, right? And so because of the length of the duration we've held these risks, what we'll see over time is we start to become more mature in our understanding of that risk and our assessment of the best controls and mitigations. And I think that's important to note, is that we can't be static or stagnant in the types of controls and mitigations, because if it is a long enduring risk that we've held, we need to constantly thinking about how to optimize the mitigations and interventions that we're making. Another good example to think about in this context is maturity for mitigation in this sense looks different based on the exposure. So we might have a certain risk event that we are prepared for, but if we go into a different operational environment, we might actually have a different exposure to that, and that requires a different level of mitigation depending on what materials and that operational environment provides us the support that we have there to actually successfully treat it. Hopefully that's a good example for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, with regards to, most projects, problems start with people, not necessarily the project itself. I mean, most projects, to be fair, if it didn't have people involved, would run pretty well. But the complexity comes in when you've got projects and people with personalities starting to deliver these projects, and the dynamics between those can get a bit muddled. And obviously, it's busy, as you said, Colin. I think you mentioned it. Projects, we just want to get them done now. The speed and the validity and the I guess you said VUCA, Jesse. It's all there because these projects now, they're not small projects. We're not necessarily doing projects. We're effectively doing programs, if we're going to be honest, or portfolio level kind of massive pieces of work across various pieces of landscape, sometimes mixed technologies as well. Rail always has a problem with this, especially because it does involve technology, software, as well as infrastructure. A question, if I don't bring this question up, I guess my listeners will hate me, because I'm very for the future. I'm a big adopter of the tech, and I've been talking about AI for years, before it got popular. It's kind of like chefs, then chefs went to master chefs, and then now all chefs are celebrity chefs. I feel like project people are getting their limelight now, and particularly because of the attractiveness and the possibility of what AI and smart tech could do for our industry, massively disrupting it in a positive way. Obviously, we don't have enough people, so we do have skills constraints and shortages, but there's also a way to reinvent some of these sectors and industries and disciplines. And I think as someone really close to the ground on this, I think risk is right up there as one of the firsts to really adopt and take advantage of AI. Now, that's my personal opinion and preference, but I'd love to hear, maybe Jesse, you first, and then over to you, Colin. Jesse, what do you think about AI?
It's an interesting question, because in personal life, I'd have a different response to, say, professional life. I think there's a huge opportunity when it comes to risk management, I agree, and project profession at large. In my personal life, I'm a creative writer. So to me, there's a huge, threat in the sense that I like to take pride in, actually writing every word and conceptualizing that and claiming it as my own. My pet peeve is reading CVs or reading reports and you'll see fiscal mentioned about 10 times and you're like, ChatGPT has been used here. So that to me is really frustrating because we cannot let AI actually remove our own cognitive reasoning and emotion and the value that we can actually give to certain dialogues in society. So when it comes to risk maturity and risk management, AI is a huge opportunity in space. There's certain AI models where they operate within constraint resolutions. So you have your engineer and your project planner up front who set the parameters and the rules for that AI model. And those rules and parameters might be hard logic in the form of calendars, they might be material and labor constraints. And then that AI model then goes and runs millions of simulations for different construction sequencing and how to optimize. You can choose whether by duration, by cost, whatever you would prefer aligned to your project objectives. And what we see is that AI doesn't omit us from the process. It actually invites us to both manage and innovate in the project environment. So we're able to optimize. And I think it's a real advantage for us because we can actually start to see our credible scenarios play out and how we can enact different mitigations. So say we have opportunity to accelerate, we might be able to add in extra resources, or it might actually be more effective to introduce new labor and materials into the construction process. And then suddenly you can see how that affects the rest of the construction sequencing and then optimize from there. It's going to be a more fluid future, I think, when we start to actually see this in practice on our projects. But what we really need is our project environments to champion this and to have this tool available to project professionals at large. It can't be one single functional professional in the project who is advocating for it. It needs to be seamlessly integrated with the entire project.
Yeah, definitely. Colin, what do you think?
I'm old school, aren't I? So AI's, I had a chat yesterday with a guy called Kwang Kwang, if you ever met him. And his company is called Optum AI, and he was actually the keynote speaker at the Institute of Risk Management networking event. And that opened my eyes to AI, and in particular to AI in the risk management space. One thing he has said is it's not going to get rid of the people. Don't panic. So there is a need still for the risk management professional, like Jessie said. We're going to still be involved, and it's just, I think, with the amount of data that's available in the risk management space, applying the AI to it, can only come up with advantages rather than disadvantages. We just need, in my mind, to make sure that I don't think we should be, again, like this maturity steps, I don't think it'd be an overnight thing, and I think people will probably try and push it. I personally would rather just take it a little step at a time, and I know technology and innovation don't wait for anyone, but to make sure that when we are using AI in the risk management space, we're using it correctly, it's supporting that maturity levels that we need it to support. But I certainly do see that as a future, having had a lot of interaction now with Kwang on the AI space in risk management. So yeah, it's coming, and it's coming fast. So you'll be using AI in risk management probably in the next year or two, I guarantee it. Yeah.
100%. I think you said something
One thing he did say,
Yeah.
Val, I'll just finish off on that. One thing he did say to me is they're currently working on interfacing or interacting or connecting with other softwares that work in the risk management space. So like we use risk management information systems, and some of those might be Cura or Active Risk Manager, and then we've got the at risk for the quantitative, and those type of systems. The AI are now starting to look and work how they can interact and connect with those, so the whole process can be linked. So
Yeah.
it's definitely getting interested in that space for sure.
Yeah, and you pointed out a really important factor for everybody listening. If you are in the risk space, AI is not coming for your jobs, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think that is even a remote possibility, because we still need, and I actually think, Jessie, your creative point, what will happen is we'll get a lot more creative in terms of how we plan and scenario base and how we utilize AI to help us kind of predict various different pathways a project potentially could go down. And risk is kind of at the forefront of that. And I've had a lot of conversations, and so's Dale, with lots of people from around the world, project professionals, and their take on AI. So I always ask that question just to get a view, even if you're old school, Colin, that's okay. This is coming for everybody. And I think one of the great things about it is it's opening the barrier of resistance. So the barrier of entry to kind of access systems and enterprise tools used to be you had to be proficient, you had to know how the tools work. I mean, we have the same conversation with Primavera P6. Unless you kind of know your way around the tool, it's pretty useless to you. Same with some of the risk tools, and if you're doing QRA or QSRAs, it can get pretty overwhelming. The value that AI will bring is that simplified interface where you won't need to know how it works. So very similar to our smartphones, we don't necessarily know how they all work, but we know that they're simple and they do what we ask them to do. So I see it as kind of this, and I think Microsoft stole the word, but co-pilot or your wingman or wingwoman to help you, support you as an assistant rather than driving the program. And I do believe there is some ethical dilemmas, Jesse, around people abusing it, but that's just normal human nature. I think when we get something of massive power, we do something naughty with it first, and we're like, oh god, we're gonna have to put some regulation around this because there's too many cowboys out there or cowgirls. So we're gonna have to get to a point where we regulate AI. That's absolutely going to happen. But one of the things I spoke to Dan Patterson about on a podcast not too long ago, was that maybe software is absolved completely, and you start with a blank canvas with this huge large language model in the background that can access anything you want, from benchmarks to inherent kind of risks to project canvases and how you might lay out the project, to the types of project teams you might want, to the organizational design, and effectively does it based on prompting, the key leadership team on what kind of project they want to set up, what kind of budget they have, what kind of risks they were happy to accept. That is not too far away with existing technology. That's how excited I am about that. But I want to know, from your perspective, what would a great risk tool look like if it had an AI capable background or system? Is there such a thing as like the perfect AI application? You're not going to offend any software companies for me because I don't really care. But from your perspective, what do you think a really good AI product might feel or look like for our listeners? Jesse, I'll go with you first.
So I'm very solution oriented, and I think us on projects and risk community at large should also be solution oriented. So for me, it's important to differentiate the quantitative and the qualitative element of risk management, and therefore that dictates what we would need from AI. So I do think there's a huge potential in the quantitative realm for AI to be involved and to help us spit out different millions of simulations that we can optimize, like I mentioned before. But then when it comes to the qualitative, I think there will still be a large degree of human interface with our project stakeholders and different functional teams across projects. But how we bring in AI to that qualitative space is really the question here. Like, there'll be opportunities to do the scenario modeling, but where we have the opportunity, if they're able to help us understand the context better or identify the risks better, that's going to be an interesting space if that's able to be possible. I'd like to see that be an even balance of AI helping us in the qualitative and quantitative realm.
Yeah, brilliant. Colin?
For me, a perfect AI tool in the space of risk management is going to help. In my mind, look, there's a lot of data available, and sifting through that data. So we all do these lessons learned, but then we all go, and like Jesse mentioned earlier, contamination, we reinvent the wheel every time we do it. I think this is where AI can really help us instead of reinventing the wheel. The data's there, the AI can identify it, what worked, what didn't work, all that type of stuff. But in order for that to happen, I think we need to not just the risk management process and the data, but we also need to feed into that system what went well, do the lessons learned bit, and feed that back into there. So when it's doing its whatever it does in AI, it's considering what went good, what didn't go good. Hey, that control worked, that one didn't. I'm not going to pull that control that didn't work back in there. So that's the way I'd see a good AI tool, and I don't know anything about AI. I've got to be honest with you, right? So on the technical side of it, but for me, risk manager, if I've got a system that can give me the good things that happened, and I can reapply them, and keep the bad things and save us time and effort on things that don't work in the background, that'd be my perfect tool. Yeah.
You've just made me realize, Colin, what I do think will be ideal if AI can do this is if we can optimize and have that optioneering up front end, like you've kind of explained, Val, with the opportunity in project inception space, but then with that mitigation space, if AI is also able to provide us that optioneering and to even give us, red, amber, greens or percentage-based effectiveness, if they can predict the effectiveness of that control, that will help us to be able to select the correct control based on our desired end result for treatment. Maybe we want to transfer it, so we're not actually super concerned about the level of how we're controlling it versus if we are the ones actually mitigating it. That would be an amazing feature to have, I think, in the future.
Yeah, it absolutely will. And, I was smiling that, and if you saw Jesse and Colin when Val was sort of, losing himself in the AI, he loves the space. I mean, if you listen back to sort of some of our first episodes, he spoke about Elon Musk every single episode, and I think he's probably got the chip in the back of his head. So, but no, it's great that I think we kick the tires on what technology can give us. But I think where I am with this is based on what you're both saying is that it's not just technology, it's not just processes, it's people, it's attitudes, behaviors, it's systems, it's the environment, it's the sector, the type of project, um, I guess the little novel uniqueness of that specific project that makes it different, that gives it, all of its risk and all of its threats and all of its opportunities. And so it's quite interesting from that perspective. And the question that I had in my mind for, I guess, both of you was, have you ever worked on a project where there was a particularly high percentage of mitigation actions that actually mitigated threats? And if so, what was that percentage and what was that project or organization doing specifically well? Let's start with you, Colin.
Yeah, so if I was going to call out a particular project, and I won't remember the names because um, it's been quite some time since I worked on a project that mitigated all these risks, to be honest with you, Dale. It was in the rail space back in the UK, working for Network Rail and working for a part of that where we was doing like, obviously going out of weekends and replacing, whether it be a bridge or a bit of track or, whatever it was. Um, because there was consistent practices, they kind of like knew the type of risk they would face. They knew the mitigations that they could apply, and which ones were effective and which ones wouldn't. Well, that is because they've been doing it for years and years and years. And a bit like that rigidity that Val mentioned with the defence, they had that type of consistency. So in that rail space in the UK, I would say, and this was across many different projects, not just one. Um, that's where I don't know what the percentage was, mate, but I'd say probably 75% of the I'll call out 75% of the risks that we captured and we had in the risk register were probably mitigated in full, and the remaining 25, which provided us that residual risk after we put our controls and treatments in place, were at a level that was within the majority of the case. We were in the level that was within the risk appetite tolerance to move forward and deliver that job. I will note that any risks that did fall outside the appetite tolerance, and that might have been when we did some quantitative modelling. If it didn't fall within a certain appetite tolerance, which we had to work within, that project didn't go forward that weekend. Yeah, so we didn't replace the bridge, we didn't replace the track. So because it was all about that rail, that train needs to come down there 6 o'clock Monday morning to take the commuters into work, and if we couldn't finish and get that project back ready for that first train, we can't do it. Yeah, so having effective mitigations and controls in place to ensure that first train runs on Monday morning to take the commuters down to London or wherever they were going. That's my example, Dale, of effective risk management, mitigations, controls, treatments.
That's brilliant. There's nothing like working on a live operational railway, right? When there's engineering closure, or position.
That's it. Yeah, engineering works here.
Yeah, it's great. It takes me back to my TFL days as well. But Jesse, is there anything particularly that stood out for you in working on various projects that, they did particularly well? For those listening to go, this is what we did particularly well, and we managed to have a great mitigation strategy, actions, tactics around ensuring that our risk didn't get out of hand.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that interface I mentioned earlier with change control. Since having worked in the change control space, you can imagine that that is seeing some of the realization of our risks. So what's important throughout the early identification of emerging changes, emerging risks, is to also be understanding the potential impacts in that space. So as a part of your change control process, having a robust change impact assessment process that has risk fundamental to all of those impact assessments is really critical, and that's where you can have a good intervention. You want to move essentially to that proactive space rather than that reactive space, and I think that's where I see a lot of opportunity. I haven't seen it necessarily done well, but to really inject that learning, like we've mentioned before, the proactive lessons management into being the proactive risk management is a huge opportunity space, and I think that will be what all organisations and projects will need to be successfully mitigating in the future. That's more of an anecdote rather than deliberate examples.
No, it's great. It's great because I think, if you combine what you and Colin are saying there, I think, and, based off the last topic you were talking to Val about around AI, I think this is where ML and AI can help with lessons learned and, planning for mitigations as well. Because if we go into the simulation space that you talk about, Jesse, if you simulated the top 10 different scenarios that could happen, if a certain event happened, that delayed you or caused you to overrun, whatever the case might be, you have a backup plan immediately. You know what the mitigation is. Potentially, you get that with the right experience in the room, but we all know that experience across the globe is in short supply. So I think it's a tough ask, but I think certainly one that we should definitely get you guys back to explore on, because I think from a technology perspective, and particularly in risk management, AI ML is just at the starting point. It's the tip of the iceberg. Um, so so yeah, we'd definitely love to have you guys back. But the hour has gone so fast. There's so much we probably want to cover with you on the next time. However, before we let you go, heading in towards the end of the pod, I want to know, I'll go to you first, Colin. Are there any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, look, I would like to say that risk management is an important part of project delivery and the whole project life cycle. A risk manager or risk professional, as most of the project controls, they need to be across every part of the project. So, you know, um, they do have the knowledge, they do have the experience in most cases, and they should have a voice when they're out there and they're supporting you guys and girls in that project delivery. So just bear that in mind. Don't give them a rough ride all the time, and listen to what they've got to say, because risk management does provide value when used properly. For those people at the top, the tone at the top is important. Without that, your whole organisation's risk is not going to be embedded and where it needs to be to support your objectives and give you the successes that you drive to achieve. Yeah, look, I'm very passionate about risk management, as you can probably tell. And I would like to say, if anyone would like to know more about risk management, as I've mentioned a couple of times, Institute of Risk Management Regional Group for Australia. If you want to come along and join one of our, like we do about every 6 weeks, a networking event or chat like this online, and every so often we do a networking event, please reach out to either myself or Jesse, and we can give you the details. And that includes you two gents as well, if you fancy it.
Brilliant.
Good discussions. Good discussions.
Awesome.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And hopefully Val's internet is working better next time. And, the thing is, I think I was going to say anyway, they could reach out to you, but what need to do for us, Colin and Jesse, is send
Yes,
us all of the links and how to get in touch, and we'll add it to the show notes so everyone can
that'd be
get
great.
on those links as well. But Jesse, your final thoughts?
I think my call to action is, as Colin's just alluded, there's a lot of industries and different sectors that implement risk management practices in different ways, and we should be learning from each other. We should be proactive and learning on not just on our projects, but across different industry sectors. I'm a huge advocate for that in translating different solutions and interventions into problem spaces into our own space. So having safe to fail experiments, encouraging, not stifling innovation. And for the risk managers, the real call to action is to be champions of those solution oriented, I guess, conversations on your projects, and to also really be a bridge between how we understand complexity and how we navigate complexity in this VUCA world.
I love it. I love it. It's changing the narrative from, oh, here comes the risk manager to, oh, here comes the risk manager.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
great. Anyway, it's been such
We're
a
here to
pleasure.
help.
Yeah, you're here to help. Exactly, you're here to help. It's been a pleasure having both of you. Let's see if Val gives us his final thoughts, if he can hear us.
Well, look, if you can't believe it or not, we did talk about risk for over an hour easily, and I'm sure we could have spoken for a lot more if we wanted to. But Jesse, Colin, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on, and we look forward to joining some of your networking events and webinars, and we wish you well. And yeah, thanks for your time today.
Thanks,
Thank
gents.
you.
No, thank you both. It's been our pleasure, and it wouldn't have been a Project Chatter podcast without some technical glitches, but I think Val's going to get straight on the line to Elon Musk to sort it out. But there you have it, folks. That is the end of this episode. Please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to Colin McCorery and Jessie Schilling for giving up their time. And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.